my view isn't that Islam is intrinsically a violent religion, and I hold that view for two reasons. One, I think it's fundamentally unproductive to convince people that an entire world religion is intrinsically violent, because not only that on both sides that inflames things and makes them worse, because people then treat Islam worse, treat Muslims worse, but also internally people hear that and think, yeah, my extreme understanding of Islam is true. Even these people who oppose Islam agree that I'm understanding Islam correctly. So it just makes things worse on both sides. But also, I don't think it's accurate, because I think, if we look at the Sufi traditions, we find a lot of what looks like real bhakti. And, if that can happen within the Islam tradition, all it takes is someone to read the Islamic texts and extract a bhakti meaning out of it. And if that can be done, I want the moderate Muslims to win the debate, not the extreme Muslims. And if we argue that Islam is an extreme religion, then we're helping the extreme Muslims win the debate.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast. Today, I've had the pleasure of meeting with Arjuna Das, a dear friend, Gaudiya Vaishnava and podcaster. Arjuna lives in Auckland, New Zealand, with his wife and 3 young boys. He has been following the practices of the tradition of bhakti-yoga for the last 15 years and grew up as a Christian. In his professional life, he runs a small electrical company, and in his spare time enjoys creating YouTube content for his channel Theology Unleashed, which explores faith, reasoning, and logic. He loves understanding other wisdom traditions and looks to understand the world's religions with an inclusivist attitude. So the main theme for today's conversation with Arjuna was, does Hinduism really exist? No, in connection to the term Hinduism, where does it come from, and how mostly does not represent the uniqueness, the variety, diversity, and specificity on all that happens in the Indian subcontinent in terms of spirituality, or even sometimes in terms of non-spiritual tradition, atheism, skepticism, logic, panentheism, polytheism, pantheism, monotheism, impersonalism, radical personalism. Many times all of this is reduced to the term Hinduism. And so we are trying today to explore the nuances beyond the term, why this term is not accurate, and creative ways in which we can engage with the vast diversity of spiritual traditions in India in a way that honors their essence, in a universal way that goes even beyond the Indian subcontinent. So please join us to the table. This is the Free Radical Podcast, and to support it, of course, please subscribe to the channel by clicking in the bell, and if you feel inspired by the conversation, like it, share it, drop your comments to keep this conversation for what it is, an ongoing, endless dialogue. So without further ado, dear friends, here is Arjuna. So welcome, Arjuna. Thanks so much for joining us in the Free Radical Podcast. Pleasure to have you here.
Hare Krishna, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, Arjuna, before we turn to the main theme of today, which is Hinduism, and if there is actually something called Hinduism, you've had your Theology Unleashed YouTube channel for some years now, and I had the honor of participating there a few times, and there you invite voices from various traditions. And in your bio, you also mentioned that you love understanding other wisdom traditions, and you look to understand the world's religions with an inclusivistic attitude. So for a minute, just for other audience to get to know you more, tell me more about what motivated to start you the podcast in this spirit of inclusivism, and how you navigate your own life and practice in relation to the wisdom of other traditions.
Yeah, well, the initial drive to start the YouTube channel was I was listening to a lot of online debates between mostly Christians and atheists. And I was thinking the Chaitanya Vaishnava perspective is not really subject to some of these objections that a lot of the atheists give. So I felt like there was some views that weren't being represented in these debates. So I wanted to bring those perspectives. So in the description of my YouTube channel, I put bringing the Chaitanya Vaishnava perspective to the online philosophy of religion debate sphere. which is a good non-polemical way of putting it, just bringing another perspective to the discussions. And then, when it comes to the inclusivistic and perennialist approach I take to other religions, that's very much rooted in my understanding of the Bhakti tradition of Chaitanya Vaishnavism. That God, there's a pop song that was popular in New Zealand a while ago that's got this line, "God's too big for one religion." It's probably a bumper sticker too. That we have this idea that God sends different prophets, different teachers at different times and places in order to gradually elevate people. So because people are different civilizations at different points in time, or different levels of advanced or uncivilized, the sort of teachings that God's going to give to these different people is going to vary. But there's still something coming from God in these traditions, even if they're at different levels of advancement when it comes to knowledge of God. So we can still find gems there. And if you look objectively at practitioners of different religions, you'll find people who have the qualities of great saints in pretty much every tradition.
Yeah. I love that you concluded on that note of the fruit of the bona fideness of a tradition, and you go to different of these main traditions and you will find genuine saints everywhere. So if that's the fruit to measure which tradition is best, that sometimes people will like to do that, we will have a hard time because there are so many saints in different traditions. And probably at the end of the day, there's the very game of comparison and competing is not the ultimate idea, right? So well, besides this particular theme of your channel and in the context of that, of the inclusivism that we are trying to approach, which I identify totally, and perennialism, we want to touch today upon one particular subject, and I'm excited to talk about that. I wanted to talk about that for some time, and you recently wrote an article on that, so I felt that will be a good way to, and I want to invite you to the podcast, so it all came together. So main theme for today's conversation, basically a question that could be quietly controversial but loudly relevant, let's put it that way, which is, does Hinduism as such really exist? And if so, what's that? And if not, then what are we talking about in the name of that terms, right? So, and we belong, both of us, to the Gaudiya Vaishnava or Chaitanya Vaishnava, as you have to refer, tradition. But for many of us, and I will say probably for many people from other, so to say, Hindu traditions, there may be an unease with being labeled as Hindu, right? Not merely discomfort with external categories, but probably about accuracy, specificity, and the uniqueness of every specific tradition. So it's how to know that in the specific terms. So today, I hope we'll try to explore where the term Hinduism come from, what's the meaning that people give, what could be alternatives to that, why the term Hinduism doesn't capture the theological, the spiritual essence of traditions like ours or any. So again, you wrote an article on that recently. Why did you feel the need to begin with? Why did you feel the need to write such an article now?
It's something I've thought about for a long time. I've started doing a lot more writing now that ChatGPT can assist with my writing, because it makes the whole process a lot shorter. One of the lines I really like.
Be careful with some technical details of inaccuracy there, just in case.
No, I try to, as much as possible when writing with ChatGPT, actually write my own points out and just get it to do the editing. So that it's actually original content. But the process of editing it to make it flow well is a lot of work. One of the lines that the AI came up with that I really liked was, Hinduism, a term without a religion. And I thought that kind of summed up my views on the matter. It's quite funny. After I wrote that article, I got the opportunity to debate a Muslim on which is more violent, Hinduism or Islam. So I launched into a debate that used the very word I was problematizing. But that whole process kind of helped me understand, like, maybe we can start by sort of steel manning or representing the perspective that likes the term Hinduism, because some people, even in our own community, are upset when we problematize the term Hinduism.
Or sometimes when we problematize any term for that matter.
Sure.
But let's concentrate on Hinduism today.
So I think when people take issue with our problematizing the word, what their concern is Hinduism is special, it's great, and there's this sort of like ethnic or nationalistic pride, and thinking Hinduism is so great, India is so great, and there might even be a concept of enemies. We've got the Muslims coming for us, we've got the West going for us, and so on. So it's kind of like galvanizing. It's like, oh, you guys want to take the teachings from India, but you don't want to identify with Hinduism. And like one of the pushbacks I got was like, yeah, well, when like a temple in Bangladesh is getting attacked by Muslims, then you're happy to get the Hindu community outpouring their compassion and calling you Hindus. But then when you're in the West preaching, you want to pretend you're not Hindus. I don't know if you want to comment on this sort of dynamic at all.
Continue.
So I just thought I'd put that there because I wanted to sort of represent the other view. But in my experience, people that comfortably wear the term Hinduism, if you press them and ask, okay, which lineage, which tradition, which acharyas, what do you actually believe? They don't actually have a lot of specifics to give. And so what that would then mean, if you can't say, I follow this tradition with this set of teachings and here's exactly what I believe, then when you're using the word Hinduism, you can't mean a specific religious practice and set of beliefs because you haven't actually got one that comes to mind when pressed. So the only thing they can mean is an ethnic identity. So the term ethnicity and ethnic identity is pretty well understood, but just to be clear, it's not race, it's not genetics, it's culture, it's cuisine, it is beliefs.
Cultural. Lots of culture, social
culture, practices, beliefs, and that differs from a religion. A religion is it's got a book, it's got a set of beliefs, it's got acharyas or theologians who are considered mouthpieces for the teachings and so on, whereas an ethnic identity is sort of just like a set of practices that are passed down through generations, but not necessarily thought about deeply.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I agree with you that, what most people get and understood and embrace as Hinduism is more like a social cultural set of rituals and social dynamics and certain cultural elements here and there. And well, on the other side, we can speak about metaphysics or religion, whatever word. Again, those are all words, so we need to define them. On the one side, you have more the social, cultural, ethnic dynamics. On the other side, we have, as you say, a set of beliefs, philosophical systems, lineages, metaphysical notions of the divine and post-life and so on. But I also appreciate that you began trying to somehow, if you will, defend the terms Hinduism and say, consider the possibility of at some times saying, okay, I'm a Hindu, which again, it's still particular in myself, in my own daily life, find myself at times replying differently when people see me dressing my robes, and it's like, so what are you? And you can see that people come from different levels of interest, right? So for some, they just want a one word thing and they continue. So if I say I'm Hindu, okay, and they continue. So there was not that much more interest actually. But from some other people, they want more details. So many times when people ask me, so which tradition do you belong? Sometimes also if they ask me even in the question, like, are you a Hindu? Do you practice Hinduism? Many times I like to ask them, so first you tell me what's your idea of Hinduism? Because if I say yes or no, I don't know what I'm replying to. Even sometimes people ask me, are you a Hare Krishna? And I say, first you tell me what's your understanding of that? Because you may have an understanding that I will need to say no to that, right? So many, and of course, many times people do not have any understanding. There's just some aesthetic curiosity and they want just a yes or no, one word answer, and that's it. But yeah, I agree. And for many people, at least in my experience, for them, Hinduism means, and you briefly addressed that in your article, like Hinduism is an umbrella term for whatever happens in India. Even those who do not take Hinduism just in terms of ethnicity or cultural, social cultural dynamics, let's say they take Hinduism as something spiritual, and they will think, okay, Hinduism is whatever happens in India in terms of spirituality. But the point is that a lot happens there. I think you refer in your article, if you go to India, you find monotheism, pantheism, polytheism, panentheism, atheism, impersonalism, what I like to refer to as radical personalism, and everything in between all these options, right? So it's a huge spectrum. And in that sense, within Hinduism, one can seem to find, as you also mentioned, almost any philosophical position and its direct opposite. So it doesn't do justice to just say, okay, all that is Hinduism, because one may be atheist, one may be hyper-theist, and so on and so forth. So, and I appreciate one more thing that I would like to mention from your article, that you made a comparison. If we just become reductionistic and boil all that down to the term Hinduism, it will be like describing Christianity, Judaism, and Islam not by those names, but as, let's say, Abrahamism, right?
Yeah.
And they will say, no, Christianity and Judaism and Islam is not the same. Yeah, but they're all Abrahamic religions. Yeah, but they're not the same, one and different. But it's interesting that we do not do the same thing many times with Hinduism, which for me will be a form of impersonalism, basically, losing the nuance, the specificity, and boiling all down, reducing it all to this, in one sense, generic term. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on
that. Yeah, you made some great points. Yeah, I'm a bit of a one of my pet peeves is misuses of language. Like my main concern with the term Hinduism is when we're using it, are people is it giving people a more accurate understanding or a less accurate understanding? So depending who you're talking to, the term Hinduism, it will bring different things to mind for different people.
Yeah.
And so they might get a more accurate or a less accurate understanding of Gaudiya Vaishnavism by identifying it with that term. The Abrahamic traditions point is a great one, because if that makes it really clear that, if somebody was a Muslim and you started saying, oh no, but you Christians and Jews and Muslims, you're all Abrahamics, you're just following the Abrahamic traditions. Why are you wanting to distinguish? Why do you want to reject this term? And it's not even that we reject the term. Sure, we're Hindus, but there's actually a lot more to it than that. And the diversity within the Abrahamic traditions is way less than what you find within Hinduism.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like in India, if you're presenting Gaudiya Vaishnavism, probably mentioning that it's Hinduism isn't going to cause people to misunderstand it, because people are pretty well aware of Hinduism over there. But in the West, there's been there's sort of like a popular version of Hinduism that comes to mind when people think of it, and it's like it's impersonal. It's I like to use the word hodgepodge, but like I've gone into Hindu households before, and they've got on their altar all the personalities, including Jimi Hendrix. And obviously that's not all Hindus.
He did some pretty good guitar. He did some pretty good guitar playing. You cannot deny that.
Yeah. This is the sort of thing that some Westerners see, and when they think of Hinduism, that sort of thing comes to mind. Whereas we're talking about a robust philosophical tradition that's actually very personal and monotheistic. Like where you find the bhakti yogis, or people we consider to be bhakti yogis, in Sufism, and the Christians, they might be the Eastern Orthodox or the Jesuits, or any Christian. You could have a bhakti element running through their soul, and we look to these people, and we're going to find more in common with them than we are with people that fall under the umbrella of Hinduism but hold very different worldviews from us and have very different practices.
And of course this is another layer to the conversation, and it may be going a little bit too far astray, but you were speaking about how when encountering or even engaging in dialogue with people from quote-unquote other traditions, I don't like so much the word other, but I would try to use the word because it draws sometimes a very heavy line and boundary, which I don't want to, again, dismiss the diversity, but also we don't want to create that much otherness, at least in my view, if we acknowledge a common mystical foundation in this tradition. So I like to use the word sister traditions. But my point was that sometimes engaging with them in dialogue and conversation, and you can, as you said, find yourself more at home, even if we may know we differ on this and this particular theological point and this idea and this philosophical element. In many ways, at least in my experience, not always, but at times I felt way more at home with some of those practitioners than not only from people from the wider Hinduist umbrella, but even from members of my own Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, which is also interesting because it's not only about, okay, we agree on the same dogma, so to say, the theological dogma, but also what's the mood and how we are processing and putting that in practice in relationship. That can also create sometimes lots of diversity, right? So again, that's for me another dimension of the conversation. With one person, you can have more diversity in terms of our beliefs, of our dogma, of our premises, philosophy and theology, but be connected in terms of how that's expressed in relationship and whatever, human terms or what. And in other cases, we can be more in line with the same theological, philosophical premises, but how we integrate them and express them in relationship may be way different, right? So, and of course, so many options in between all that. But I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with your point in general.
Those are all reasons why, rather than using umbrella terms that'll often lead to misunderstanding, we should get specific about, let traditions stand on their own terms and represent themselves. Like if I'm debating a Christian or interviewing a Christian, I will have my pushback on their views, but I won't tell them what their views are. I'll say, here's my objection. If you hold this view, this objection stands. And they can say, oh, I don't understand Christianity that way. Here's how I understand Christianity. And I will let them speak for themselves what their beliefs are.
Since you mentioned the topic of debate for a moment before returning to Hinduism, I mean, you yourself describe yourself as engaging in debate. So what's your way of entering into that arena, so to say, not to put it in wrestling terms, but how you engage in those types of exchanges in a way, as much as you can, to remain respectful and appreciative and even learning from your quote unquote opponent or the other person on the side of the table, because it's so easy to get passionate and want to be right and defeat the other person and become biased. And so how you keep, as much as you can, your unbiased presence in that type of exchanges?
Yeah, I'd say there's two key points. One is the one I just mentioned, that don't tell somebody else what their beliefs are. If they've studied their Bible, they've got their own understanding of Christianity, let them give their own interpretation of the Bible. It's really hurtful to have somebody else come in and tell you, oh no, this is what your religion teaches, you're understanding it wrong, when it's like, you don't even have faith in this book. What are you doing trying to tell me what it means? So that's one thing. I let people speak as individuals and give their own understanding, and then I'll only address views that person is actually there to defend and has articulated themselves, or as I've articulated and they've accepted my version of their view as accurate. The second one is, it's so easy when you're going into a debate to think, I have to be right at any cost. I've got to prove this wrong at any cost, and get worried. Oh, what if they bring up some evidence that I'm not ready for? Or what if they bring up a point that actually shows that I'm wrong? And the way I deal with that is to think, then fantastic. If I learn that I was wrong on something and I develop a more accurate worldview, great. I'm here to come to the truth. So I will go in there with the arguments I have, present them honestly and accurately as best I can. And if they have counter arguments that are actually legitimately prove me wrong, then I will have a more accurate worldview after the debate.
Amen. Beautiful. Yeah, that's what in our tradition we call bada, right? A real conversation with both parts hopefully are there for the pursuit of the truth, not trying to defeat each other, but just wanting truth to be the winner, so to say. And have you had some of these debate dynamics with other members of the Gaudiya Chaitanya Vaishnava tradition, or mostly with Christians, Muslims, people from sister traditions?
I've never entered into internal debates for two reasons. One, I don't feel like I'm knowledgeable enough to debate the finer details of our theology.
I was just about to invite you to enter the arena right now, but okay.
And two, I kind of don't really feel a calling for that. From what I see online, there's a lot of people internally debating, within our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. Yeah. And I don't feel like throwing my head in the ring is really needed. There's so many people doing it already. But what I do see a need for is there's pretty much nobody or very few people doing the kind of Western outreach that I've been attempting with my YouTube channel, of actually engaging with Christians, atheists, academics, and presenting our views within a Western philosophical framework. And what I have noticed is there's even like philosophical objection to the very notion of articulating our views in that sphere, because it's the kind of concern is if you debate them on their terms using science and reason, then you're tacitly admitting that the wrong pramana is accurate, and you could end up falling yourself and misunderstanding the tradition because you yourself start to only believe things about your tradition that are empirically supported by Anuman and Pratyaksha, and you could lessen your understanding or your focus on Shabda Pramana.
So you have received some pushback in that direction here and there from members of your own tradition.
I'm convinced now that the reason why we don't have academics doing philosophy, well, there's a handful of devotees, like literally a handful, like maybe 5, definitely less than 10, that are actually doing this kind of work at an academic level. And if you want to call what I'm doing on my YouTube channel academic, it still keeps the number around maybe 5. I have a published paper. I co-authored it with an actual academic, Adi Purusha. Actually,
okay. I did a podcast with him recently.
Oh, nice. Yeah, he's awesome.
On theodicy.
Yeah, that was the topic of his PhD. Yeah, we did a philosophical paper on reincarnation and the problem of hell, arguing that reincarnation is a better form of purgatory and makes more sense and solves the problem of hell. Allows God to be just and all-loving.
Yeah, interesting that you made that connection between reincarnation and purgatory, because I recall myself, I haven't read that particular paper you two wrote, but talking myself with Richard Rohr, one Christian author, Franciscan, and basically that same idea was what came to me when we were talking about the principle of reincarnation and so on. Nice. So going back to Hinduism, Arjuna, for a moment, more than for a moment. The term Hinduism in itself, you speak a little bit about that in your article. So where does the term Hinduism come? Because it's not a term that we find in the Vedic scriptures, in the Sanskrit ancient texts. So from what we know, it emerged outside of India or in the context of India, but from outside sources, probably imposing a false notion of what's going on there. So I don't know if you have anything to share in that regard.
I think was it Persians living on the other side of the Sindhu River? And originally it was just the Sindhu River is mispronounced a couple of times and ended up as Hindu. And it was just a term to refer to people that lived on the other side of the river. So it's a geographical designation in its origins. And that's basically consistent with the meaning it's evolved to have of an ethnic identity. So yeah, that's how it started. Is the Muslims living on the other side of the Sindhu River referred to the Indians as Hindus, and then initially the Indians would only use that term like when they're talking to other Persians, other Muslims, and say, yeah, sure, we're the Hindus, yeah, okay. And then internally they wouldn't use that term; they'd have their own terms. But eventually they started to wear that term themselves. So that's how the term originated. If we wanted, the next question becomes, well, okay, it's a modern term, but does it have a Vedic corollary? So we've got lots of terms in English that more or less we've got a direct translation for in Sanskrit. But this term Hindu, we can't find any term in Sanskrit from a Vedic text that we could consider to have the same meaning that the word Hinduism is used for today. The closest one I came up with was Astika, as opposed to Nastika. And Astika refers to people who have faith in the Vedas. Nastika refers to people who don't accept the Vedas as authoritative sources of knowledge. And in India at the time, that was Buddhists. There was also some other, were there Charvakas or? Who also didn't accept. Yeah. And that's how the term was used. So that's the closest thing in terms of meaning, because when we think of a Hindu, we basically, we describe it as an ethnicity, but there is a bit more to it than that. We'll get into this at some point too, which is there is actually certain beliefs that if somebody says they're a Hindu, they're more than either not going to hold or they probably will hold. So we can get into those. There are things about like no eschatology reincarnation, and so on. Whereas a Christian, or somebody in the Abrahamic tradition, they pretty much all believe in an eschatology. They pretty much all reject reincarnation. So there are some dividing lines in terms of what beliefs you'll find in Hinduism and outside of Hinduism. So it's not totally devoid of content when it comes to belief structure. But yeah, carrying on with other terms we could look for in Sanskrit as a translation. Another term that's commonly given is Sanatan Dharma.
Yeah, I'd like to go there in a minute. Yeah, that's
okay.
possible. Yeah. Something that comes to my mind also regarding what you mentioned, Arjuna, as Hinduism coming originally from this, at least from what we know, this mispronunciation, the Sindhu River, and those who live on the other side of the Sindhu become the Sindhus and eventually the Hindus. But how also the term start to have its own meaning for those outside of India, especially for the Western mind, which, as you mentioned also in your article, if I'm not mistaken, that the West was used to religions like, again, Abrahamic religions like Christianity and Islam, which some of its qualities are like, okay, a single founder, a single sacred text, right? The Bible, the Quran, whatever, the Torah, a clear orthodoxy and heresy, boundaries, as you mentioned. But again, you go to India and the religious landscape there is like very varied, very diverse, nothing like that. So maybe while faced with such a complex array of diversity, the Western mind imposed their own model, basically, right? As I think you mentioned, like that.
Yeah.
They imagine India's traditions in plural as one tradition, Hinduism, which many sects, much like, again, you have the Christian denominations of that denomination, but again, as we're trying to explain so far, that's not entirely accurate.
Yeah, what this came up in the debate I had with the Muslim a few weeks back, when I was talking to some Hindus after the discussion who wanted to help me prepare some response content. They were pointing out things like in Vedic traditions, you have the Vedas, but you don't actually get your doctrine. Your Siddhanta doesn't come just from reading all of the Vedic texts. Your Siddhanta actually comes from acharyas who give you an understanding, and then they'll argue for it based on the Vedas. They'll show how this is what the Vedas actually teach. But really, the whole thing is based on acharyas. So I was saying in a debate, he's like, because he was doing that. This was a very polemical debater I was up against, and he was doing all the stuff that I said not to do at the beginning. He was saying, pulling quotes out of Manu Smriti and whatever other thing he's saying, and saying, look, this is what the Vedas teach. I'm like, the English version I came up with, that to describe this as interpretive tradition. Actually, ChatGPT gave this to me, but interpretive tradition is, we have the term sampradaya.
Yeah.
So if you want to say this is an authentic Vedic teaching, you need to be able to show a sampradaya that props that up as their teachings and quote acharyas who present that. And I was setting the bar pretty low. Like in Vedic context, there's a bar for who can be called an acharya. You can't just have anyone who can articulate themselves well and say they're an acharya. There's certain qualities they need to have, which we could get into, I guess. But he couldn't give any interpretive tradition. He couldn't mention anybody anywhere who understood those texts in the way he was presenting. So the misunderstanding comes here. The difference, bringing this back to the point, is in Abrahamic traditions, they've got the book, and the book is where you get the doctrine. So they've got the Quran and Islam, they've got the Bible and Christianity. And in Christianity, they've got certain hermeneutics. Basically, they take their doctrine from the New Testament. The Old Testament's considered to be abrogated. But still, it's very simple. You read the book, whatever's there in the Bible and the New Testament, that's Christian doctrine. Whereas the Vedas are diverse. There's so many texts, and you got to know which books to prioritize. You got to know which Sanskrit verses within those books to prioritize, and that all comes through acharya, through interpretive tradition. So that's one major difference. Coming back on your point of misunderstanding, that when the Westerners went to India, they were looking for a religion like Christianity, like one set of teachings, one book, and the Western paradigm for religions doesn't have room for something as diverse as Hinduism, because in Hinduism we've got basically this pluralistic understanding is baked into it, that there's different understandings for different people. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, I give those who worship the demigods, I make their faith strong. Those who worship in this way, I make their faith strong. And the idea is that, whatever level you're at, you need to follow the practices and have faith in that so that you're actually going to follow it.
Mm-hmm.
So we could think of it like someone going to an Alcoholics Anonymous thing, that it sounds rude to say some teachings are lower and some teachings are higher, but this is really what it is. If you want to say there's different teachings, we can't say they're all equal. We've got to say some are higher and some are lower. Some people are, the Vedic understanding is the mode of ignorance, mode of passion, the mode of goodness, and the religious practices and teachings that are going to meet people where they're at and elevate them forward are going to be different for those different people. And the Western mind has, at least at the time when they were going to India, it didn't have any category for that, and probably still there's a huge amount of not understanding that category.
Okay, there's a lot there. Thank you, Arjuna. I'm thinking about, for example, I appreciate, first of all, that you mentioned this point, which is an important one, how when you go to India, you go even to the Vedic texts, if we want to use that term. Not only there are many texts, but also one single text, let's say the Bhagavad Gita, or let's say the Upanishads, or let's say Vedanta Sutra. You will find, as you say, the emphasis on Acharya and Sampradaya, because each particular lineage will have its own reading of those texts, its own perspective. And we are not saying here that there's only one that is correct and all the others are wrong, because we find this tradition of the Ramanuja Sampradaya, commenting on the Ramanujacharya, commenting on the Gita, we commenting on the Gita, and we acknowledge Ramanujacharya as an Acharya, as a bona fide Sampradaya. So my point is, there may be one single book, as you mentioned, how the West may come. Okay, what's their book? Even if there will be one book, which there is not, but even if there will be one book, let's say the Bhagavad Gita, to pick one. But again, that's not the only one. Still, you have so many readings and so many Sampradayas and lineages and Acharyas approaching the text from different places. And in this case, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, and if not, I still love you, Arjuna. from many of these perspectives, I wouldn't necessarily label them some as higher or lower. I get your point on higher or lower in terms of people in their journey being closer to spiritual divine realization and people not so close. But also, as we get closer, or if we have got there, so to say, there are different approaches to the divine. In other words, I don't know, if someone is loving, and this is a conversation I had recently with Swami Medhananda from the Ramakrishna Mission. For example, in our tradition, the Srimad Bhagavatam describes reality, tattva, as advaigyan, non-dual consciousness, which expresses itself as Brahman, Paramatman, and Bhagavan. But basically, it refers to these three, Brahman, Paramatman, and Bhagavan, as different phases of the same non-dual reality. So, confirmed. We have our contract to confirm the important points here. So what we were talking is like, how much can we present a hierarchy in transcendence, in a reality that is non-dual? Of course, we can present hierarchies based on certain yardsticks. Like, for example, the Vaishnavas emphasize so much this concept of rasa, or sacred static rapture and sweetness and intimacy. But some others, people will feel fully satisfied with the relationship with the divine, which has not that much sweetness. As I like to say sometimes, objectively speaking, mango is the sweetest fruit, let's say. But subjectively speaking, someone may say, but apple is my favorite one. And it's okay, right? So that's the highest for me. So in other words, if someone is worshiping Narayan in Vaikuntha, I personally, as a Gaudiya Vaishnava, do not feel comfortable saying that's lower. Because that exists in eternity, that has a place in eternity. How can I say that something in eternity is lower? You follow my point? Of course, I will say, in terms of intimacy and sweetness, okay, I will say Christian Vrindavan is the real thing. But if someone say, okay, but in terms of non-differentiated, homogeneous experience, Brahman is the real thing. And that's right. That's just not my cup of tea. Or in terms of reverential servitude, Narayana and Vaikuntha is the real thing. You follow my point, right?
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. So I think there's two different axes to look at. One is the axis that is actually a difference of flavor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I like chocolate ice cream and you like vanilla ice cream, it's not that one's higher or lower. It's just a difference in preference. And the different rases that exist in the spiritual world are differences in flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's some descriptions from the acharyas about how, you know, there's this rasa is more full than this rasa, and this rasa has more qualities than that rasa. But ultimately, wherever you end up in the spiritual world, you're going to be fully satisfied, and it's really better understood as a difference of flavor. But then there's also, you know, if somebody is an alcoholic and, you know, gets drunk every weekend, and the sort of teachings you can actually communicate to this person is far simpler. So when we got Sanskrit terminology for this too, which makes it way better, because the Sanskrit the theology is described in the Vedas with the Sanskrit language is very precise and clear categories. So anytime we can find a Sanskrit term, we're doing well. So we got rasas, and those are flavor differences.
Yeah,
and then we've got
in fact in Sanskrit there is an expression called rasa vichar, which means like discernment in terms of rasa, right?
And then there's sattva, rajas, and tamas, and basically sattva is good, rajas is worse, and tamas is the worst. And that's definitely a hierarchy, right? The mode of ignorance, a person is suffering. Mode of passion, a person's suffering, but less so.
Yeah, and of course that's another conversation in itself, but also I will argue, I mean, we're not in a debate, I haven't entered the arena with you, but also there's a place to speak about rajas and tamas in a more positive lenses. For example, tamas induces sleep, and if we don't sleep, we go crazy, basically. So there is a, so to say, healthy role to tamas, to inertia. Or rajas sometimes is translated, depends how we understand these three terms. That's my point. Sometimes sattva is more balanced, rajas is more dynamism. Sometimes you need that rajasic push to engage in some dynamic action, whatever the case. Tamas as inertia, and sometimes you need to be inert in the sense of take rest and sleep. Again, I'm just adding nuance to how we may understand the three modes or the three gunas in a user-friendly way, so to say, right?
That we'd probably call that a different technical use of the term of the gunas, because so there's the gunas when it comes to the actual hierarchy of, you know, this person's a drug addict because they're in the mode of ignorance. This person's chasing their business goals, they get them and they're not even happy. That's mode of passion. And then mode of goodness is what one, because even somebody in the pure mode of goodness, they still sleep, they still do all these other things. So then the gunas, as applied to someone in the pure mode of goodness, will be a different meaning of the word. But it might be useful to just quickly explain what we mean here by the gunas in terms of hierarchies. Like somebody in the mode of ignorance, they try to enjoy first, and then they end up suffering later. So this is
immediacy.
The most extreme examples of this is drug addiction. And I heard a really good explanation of dopamine and why things like exercise, because exercise, like healthy activities like that, they also give you a dopamine hit the same way drugs do. But you can't really become addicted to jogging the way you can to illicit drugs, because the work is first and the enjoyment's later. So you do the exercise and then you feel good after. And then if you get to the point where it's actually on the level of addiction, you're just like, oh, I really just can't be bothered anymore. You know, I'll go for another run right now. Whereas when the enjoyment's first and the suffering's later, people can really get into a negative spiral like that. Whereas mode of passion is you work now for enjoyment later. And perhaps mode of goodness is the same thing, but you're not working now for enjoyment later. You're working now for some actual ultimate goal. So I'm not working hard to get a big bank balance so that I can be rich and enjoy. I'm working hard to purify my heart so that I never have to go through the horrible things that are part of this existence of samsara ever again. I want to actually make things right once and for all by making my heart right with God.
Yeah, and I would say even about that, probably we are talking about sattva now, but will be
that's what I think. Sattva is
I'm working just what I'm doing is what I want to do for eternity, and I'm not even doing what I'm doing like some spiritual practice or worship. I'm saying not even for the sake of liberation, right? Because in our tradition, at the end of the day, our goal is not even moksha or mukti, but just love for its own sake, so to say, right? Bhakti for the sake of bhakti. But again, of course, I appreciate the clarification on gradations, and since we are being careful with the usage of words and what words can mean, just I think it's good that we clarify all these terms from Hinduism to Sattva. So many things can mean different things depending a broader picture and the context, right?
Just one more quick point on that. Now I run a business. I do a lot of business coaching, and I was listening to Alex Ramosi, and he's talking about that. A lot of good business coaching is one of my coach's clients was saying to him, "Oh, this is so much work. I'm hating this. It's a nightmare." And he's like, "You don't have to do this. You can go get a job again. You can quit." And he's like, "Oh no, I want to do it." And it's all about what actual goal do you want? Figure out what goal you want. Figure out the steps to get there, and actually do it. And I think spiritual life is the same thing. Like people who come to bhakti, they figured out, I want God, or they see Prabhupada, or they see, some other personality who's got great love of God, and they think, I want what he's got. And it's like, cool, if you want that, here's the steps how to get it. And that's relating this back to our discussion of hierarchy of religion is different people actually want different things out of religion.
Yeah.
And there's different religions available, or different versions of each religion.
Even if they say, I want God, why you want God? There may be different intentions, different motivations, right?
And God caters for all of that. And that's why we've got a whole diversity of religion.
And
I think there is a hierarchy of goals. Some goals are actually
Dharma, Kama, Moksha, Krishna in the Gita saying, people come to me for money, for fame, for relief of suffering, for knowledge. As you say, I received them all. But that doesn't mean that there's not a hierarchy there.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Going back to Hinduism, and for a moment, I'm thinking if you will like, and you also mentioned that in your article, the notion of, for many, I will say my experience, not for all, but for those who are, some people say Hinduism and they have no clue what's Hinduism. They only know there's a word called Hinduism, again, for whatever happens over there in India. For some other people that are a little bit more introduced, I will say, for many, not for all, Hinduism is almost a parallel with Advaita Vedanta. And for most people, that's basically what's Hinduism, or what's spirituality in Hinduism. Probably I will say that big part of the universalization of Advaita Vedanta has happened through figures like Swami Vivekananda that you referred to in your article. Probably one core moment of that is this famous Parliament of World Religions in Chicago that he was in, and he introduced Hinduism, so to say, but more from a perspective of Advaita Vedanta. I'm not saying that necessarily that was his intention or plan, because if one studies the philosophy of Vivekananda, more specifically his guru Ramakrishna, he was very much open to God is impersonal and personal, and both simultaneously, and some people choose to relate to him in one way and on the other, and both are equally valid, and they have a place in eternity and so on. I've been talking recently about that with a sannyasi from that order, Ramakrishna order, Swami Medhananda. So I think that big part of the momentum that was created a few centuries back came from that lecture from Vivekananda about Hinduism, and most emphasis in Advaita Vedanta, which of course the price for that is that other paths are marginalized, and whatever you use the word Vedanta, for most people is, Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. I just say there are other Vedantic systems which are not monism, but they are monotheistic, Vishistadvaita, Advaita, Chintya Veda, Vedanta, if you want to use that term. And I can see still a few centuries after, many people is like, really? I thought this was Vedanta meant this, right? I'm these days reading some of the diaries written by Bhakti Hridaya Bon Maharaj, this disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who went to the West in the 1930s, mostly to England, to Germany, and tried to approach the intelligentsia of the time. And it's interesting how, despite his campaign and everything in relation to that, he reports so many times how people who got to hear from him got, I didn't know that Hinduism was or I didn't know that there was all this stuff in Hinduism. I thought that Hinduism was just this, Advaita Vedanta. And now you are speaking about Vedanta, but from another perspective. So this happened again almost a century back, but I would say still today,
Yeah.
not on the same level. I would say there is more scholarly presence and education in terms of different branches of Vedanta, but still there seems to be some homework to be done from our part. What do you think?
That point you just made is precisely why I wrote that article. That's exactly my concern. Is it brings more understanding the misunderstanding when people identify us as Hindus, because they think Hinduism is Advaita Vedanta, which they understand as monism, and a lot of these people come from a Christian background, and if they are going to take up a religion, it will be a monotheistic one, or they're already monotheists, and they have various concerns with monism as a belief system.
Yeah, and I think I told you in the past that I've had some conversation with Christians, and they are many times used to use this term, the three great world religions, right? So Christianity, Islam, Judaism, in terms of monotheism and in terms of numbers, because for them, for most of them, Hinduism is something else. Now, it's not, they do not relate that with monotheism. And when I tell them, no, actually, the monotheistic expression of Hinduism, to use those terms, is called Vaishnavism, and it has more than 600 million followers worldwide. So technically speaking, it's one of the, it's actually replacing Judaism in the three greatest world religions, if we want to use those terms. And of course, for most of them were like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know there was such a thing as monotheism in India, no? So that, again, for me, brings back the idea of, for them, it was Advaita Vedanta, monism, and I'm not canceling that window, but I'm saying that's not the only Vedantic phase of India.
Yeah, and historically, Vaishnavism was more mainstream in India than the monist views.
Yeah.
On your points on Vivekananda, I actually had a hard time getting ChatGPT to word the article in a way that I felt was harsh enough on Vivekananda. You wanted to do the whole be really respectful of him and thing, but you mentioned that his personal beliefs are more at least allow space for the theistic view, for the personalist view, than what is often his opponents give him credit for. But even if he did hold views that were more inclusive of the personalistic view, it really looks like what he was doing there was not trying to accurately represent Hinduism. I think what he was trying to do was position Hinduism in competition with Christianity on Christian terms. And there's no way to do that without misrepresenting the traditions. So I don't actually have a lot of sympathy for that kind of behavior, because I think if you want to, the Westerners came to India with a certain paradigm, and he's saying, okay, they've got this paradigm, let's show him how our religion fits their paradigm and is better. But really, you can't do that without just totally misrepresenting Hinduism. What he needed to do instead was talk about the paradigm differences and explain how Hinduism is very different, and here's how it's different, and then accurately represent it.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Of course, I'm not sure how much the followers of Swami Vivekananda may agree with them or not. They may at some point. I'm not saying they're not, and who knows, which were his intentions, but I get your point. At least from my experience, from what his Guru Ramakrishna said and some of his current representatives said, they seem to hold an open consideration to all these different possibilities. But at least I agree with your point that I don't think that's a good, if that will have been his intention, I don't think that's the best tactic, at least as I would have done it. But again, who am I?
Well, it's a lot easier to just work with the paradigm that your audience already has, and then articulate things based on that.
That's how I personally
the paradigm takes a lot of work. But maybe I should go analyze the speech in depth and figure out if I think that sounds like what he was doing. But that's at least my current position.
We can put you in debate with some sannyasi from Ramakrishna Mission, no problem. That can happen quickly.
Sure, I'm open to it. I've actually been wanting to interview somebody from an impersonalist Vedanta school, and it's hard to get them on because one of the things that the Advaita Vedantists believe is that what is it? Anirvachaniya?
Anirvachaniya, yeah,
You
incomprehensible.
Incomprehensible. The literal Sanskrit translation of this is it can't be articulated.
Yeah, but of course they will have their own arguments in terms of our use of words like achintya and so on. Anyhow, good luck.
So, yeah, somebody who thinks that the topic of discussion is something that can't be accurately described with language, generally their approach is to refuse debate because they'll say, I'll present my views and you'll give some language that makes my views sound wrong, but actually language is incapable of addressing this subject. So you just have to sort of contemplate it, but you can't debate it.
Wow, interesting. I only thought that they will resort to this word nirvachaniya, which was used by Shankaracharya in terms to explaining certain aspects of how Brahman can be covered by Maya and so on and so forth. Some other aspects more in terms of their philosophy and not so much like bringing the term to the debate arena and not engaging in debate or in conversation by invoking that term. But I will say that I'm sure that there are some Advaitins that will be willing to engage in conversation.
I haven't made...
And just a technical clarification, I wouldn't label followers of Ramakrishna Mission as Advaita Vedanta necessarily.
Okay.
Though some of them may lean more to that understanding, but they have something that is called Vijnana Vedanta that Ramakrishna presented, which was, again, this both considering the impersonal Brahman experience and the Bhakta relationship with Bhagavan in eternity. So I wouldn't describe, just for terms of technical clarification, as merely Advaitin. But yeah.
So that sounds like more of something that might even be synonymous with Achintya Bheda Tattva.
There are many interesting correlations. As I told you, I had this conversation with Swami Padmanabha, which will be published before our conversation is published. And he wrote an article basically making some comparison between Achintya Veda and Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. I can then share the article with you, and probably then you can engage in conversation with him.
If they hold a view that's similar to ours, then they probably would agree to debate. Yeah. I should add, I haven't made a huge effort to find Advaita Vedantists to debate, so it's not like I've gone scouring and they've all refused. I've had, the odd. I don't know many Advaita Vedantists, so I don't come across them very often. And the few that I haven't wanted to debate or haven't found somebody who wanted to debate it. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, one more thing that came to my mind now, not so much related to Advaita Vedanta in itself, but with the term Hinduism, is that if Hinduism is everything that happens in India in terms of spirituality, then Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Sikh tradition should be also part of that. But somehow, at least in current modern dialogue, in many parts, they are identified as separate traditions, right? They all say, okay, that's Buddhism, that's Hinduism. So it's interesting that somehow with the Vedantic schools, still that's not that much the case, in my opinion. There's still some merging. All that is Hinduism. Well, yeah, we have the Sikhs, we have the Jains, we have the Buddhists, and we have the Hindus. So why you think that's the case? Why you think maybe
I think
have not been able to diversify and be seen by the world as for what they are basically?
I think there is some things that the word Hinduism does pick out. It's not purely a geographical designation. I mentioned earlier the word Ashtika, which means one who accepts the Vedas, and basically it'd be hard for somebody to call themselves a Hindus if they didn't place value on any of the Vedic texts. Even if they're just what we could call an ethnic Hindu. Yeah. They still think the Vedas are valuable, even if they don't study them. They're still like, yeah, the Vedas are great. Whereas the Jains and the Buddhists, they don't really care for the Vedas, do they?
No, there's not basically an embrace of the Vedas as foundational.
So, someone who calls himself a Hindu, they might be vegetarian, they might eat meat, they might be an atheist, they might be a theist, they might be a monist, there could be all sorts of things. But they'll be familiar with stories about Ganesh and Shiva and Vishnu and Brahma, and they'll either accept these stories as literal or mythical or didactic or allegorical, but they'll be familiar with these stories and they'll think they're valuable.
They have some place in their paradigm. Yeah.
They'll pretty much anyone who calls himself a Hindu will believe in reincarnation. Even if they eat meat, they'll probably think that not eating meat is good, whereas a Christian might think eating meat is good. I mentioned reincarnation, and there's no eschatology. There's sort of this pluralistic understanding. Although I think traditionally in the Indian religious traditions, you'd had this pluralistic, inclusivistic understanding baked in. I think as Indian culture is modernizing, they are getting this more tribal understanding of we're Hindus, we're right, they're Muslims, they're Christians, they're wrong, we're right. I think there is some of that in like the Hindu diaspora in various countries of like really owning this ethnic identity and us and them. And again, this will be people who aren't really studying what the Vedas teach.
And in that connection, that brings to my mind the topic of Sanatana Dharma that we briefly mentioned before. Because again, in the Vedas, as you mentioned, even in the Rig Veda, with at least for the scholars, is the most ancient text, the most ancient Veda. You have these lines like, I don't know, Ikam Sad Vipra Bahudat Badanti, like according to the seers of truth is one, and it expresses itself in multivarious ways. And this term Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, is not in the scriptures per se as a term, but again, you refer to Astika, and we have also Sanatana Dharma, which appears in Vedic texts, especially texts like Mahabharata, but many others as well. So I wonder what's your thoughts on the term Sanatana Dharma as a good, I don't want to say replacement for Hinduism, but in a way of addressing that in a broader term, because again, Sanatana Dharma basically translates, difficult to translate, but it's something like eternal religion or the eternal function or the eternal duty. Sanatana means eternal.
Yeah.
And Dharma means to sustain, and ma means I, me. So that which sustains us, that which a set of values that makes our lives meaningful, sustainable. So the eternal principles, something like, which for me is way more perennialist and way more universal than a geographical terminology like Hinduism.
Yeah, I think we'll agree on this one. So unpacking the term Sanatana Dharma, the word Sanatan, means eternal. The word eternal is also used to mean, there's the word sat, which means truth, but it's also described in places that anything that isn't eternal doesn't actually exist. It's just an illusion. So these, temporary things of like, the events we're going through in our lives, the real thing is the relationship we're having with other souls, with God. That's real and that's eternal and carries on. But, the car we drive, that's, here today, gone tomorrow, didn't exist in the past. The atoms that make it up continue to exist, but the car doesn't. So, there's some nice meme I saw the other day about, what was it? Stop trying to, if you focus too much on trying to give your kids a good future, you can forget to give them a good today. And it's just a nice focus on like the relationship, like anything you do with your kids around. It's like, the kids aren't going to remember if you got all the stuff right, but they are going to remember like making them eat their dinner. They're not going to, it's not really, in 20 years, it's not really going to matter if they finish their dinner today, but they might remember if you yelled at them for not finishing their dinner. It hurts the relationship. So relationship's eternal. So Sanatan has this meaning. Souls are eternal, cars aren't, various other things aren't. So when we talk about Sanatan Dharma, that means Dharma that applies, it's not the Dharma I have because of my job, because of my career, because of the body I have now. It's the Dharma I have as a spirit soul, regardless of what body I am, in relationship to God.
Yeah, it's transcultural, social, transbody. Again,
So it's distinguished from other kinds of dharma. There's what's the other term for like mundane dharma?
Naimitika dharma.
Naimittika dharma. Yeah, so that's basically
occasional dharmas, occasional duties.
Yeah, so I run a business. I've got employees. I need to bring in enough work to bring in the revenue to pay them, because if if they lose their jobs because I don't run the business well, that's not good for them. Or I have kids, I have to look after them. But in the future they'll be growing up and they'll be looking after themselves, and I'll have different dharmas. So these are, it's not that these things shouldn't be done. It's just a different category of dharma. So you can look after all your Naimittika dharma, and you can totally neglect Sanatan dharma. And Sanatan dharma is a different kind of thing. It's like not urgent. It's like, my kid's not going to starve because I didn't do my Sanatan dharma. I can run around all day putting out fires that legitimately need to put out, and not put out the one big karma, which is fire, which is my relationship with God.
You shouldn't pay full attention to your Sanatan dharma in a way that your kids are starving.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
that's a practical piece of advice, not for you, Arjuna. You're not doing that, but sometimes that happens also, right? In the name of the ultimate dharma, we end up neglecting so many things that could be integrated in our pursuit of that Sanatan dharma.
So I've kind of talked about the word Sanatan a bit. The word dharma, I guess I already talked about it. One way it's translated as duty, one way it's translated as religion. It's described that sugar being sweet, that's the dharma of sugar. It's something that
like
you
intrinsic
cannot be without.
Quality on the element.
Intrinsic quality, yeah. So our dharma is then when you're acting not in keeping with your true nature. So if we then talk about Sanatan dharma and say this is that religion over there that came from India, we're totally misunderstanding the term based on what I just described.
Yeah, that reminds me. I mean, and with all respect and affection and saying this, but that last year I was invited to a retreat in New Mexico with a group of Franciscans. I mean, not all Franciscan Christian people, and one Franciscan person I'm close to, Richard Rourke. And they invited me very gently and hosted me, and it was very nice. But I was introduced, I appreciated. I mean, I chuckled at that. I was introduced to the group like, oh, here we have our Eastern brother, right? So for me, it was interesting how I was looked up as an Eastern person, right? Still a geographical notion, because it's in Hinduism, it's India instead of Sanatan Dharma. Again, something eternal, something universal. Again, not criticizing, was saying with affection. But even I thought it's interesting because they are Christians, but they don't identify themselves as Eastern. Probably they identify themselves as Western, though Christianity, in one sense, you could say, was born in the East. Again, that's on the geographical level, right? It's a Christian, all the Abrahamic religions, Hinduism, quote unquote, all that was born in the East. But of course, on top of that, we have this notion of Sanatan Dharma, which is transgeographical, basically. So do you see that as a good replacement for Hinduism? Or still, I will say, in my opinion, of course, it's a good way to begin the conversation, but still it lacks specificity because we have multiple expressions of Sanatan Dharma. What would you say about that?
Yeah, the term Sanatan Dharma, the way I understand the term is it basically means something like true religion. So if you want to say you're following Sanatan Dharma, the claim you're making is that you're doing what God wants you to be doing right now. And so to say Hinduism is Sanatan Dharma and our other religions are not, is basically saying our religion's true and your religions are false. That's the way I look at it. And that might not be what people mean by the terms, but if we unpack the actual meanings of the terms described in the Vedic texts, then that's essentially what's being said. So if they want to use the term Sanatan Dharma as a substitute for Hinduism, they're misunderstanding the original meaning of the word, or they're giving it a new meaning.
Yeah, so you will apply, you in your personal understanding, you will conceive of Sanatan Dharma as whatever genuine manifestation of alignment with the divine will, wherever it happens, no matter the tradition. So a genuine Christian, a genuine Muslim, a genuine Jewish practitioner, they're all practicing Sanatan Dharma. You will read that from that substantial place.
Yeah, that's how to look at it. Yeah, if we take the assumption that they're following God nicely, then we can say they're following Sanatan Dharma. And will you see that align with the term perennialism, for example? Will you see any difference between the two? How do you feel about equating Sanatan Dharma with perennialism? No, yeah, they're not synonymous, because you could say, I follow Sanatan Dharma and no other religions follow it, only Hindus follow it. So you could still use the term accurately and just be saying my religion's true, everyone else is false.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I question how much that will be an accurate usage of the term Sanatan Dharma, but yeah, I get it.
Well, what you're saying is, I'm following Sanatan Dharma, and I mean, it's hypothetically possible. We could imagine a world where a religion pervades everywhere outside of India.
Mm-hmm.
That's hypothetically possible.
Mm-hmm.
But if we look around the world, like, this is one argument I give to Christians if they're defending an exclusivist view, which means they're saying Christians are saved, everyone else is going to hell, we're following God, nobody else is following God. If they defend that, then I'll say, okay, but if we understand there's certain qualities that a man of God has, that a saintly person has, and we look at these qualities, Christianity doesn't have a monopoly on that, and nor does Hinduism.
Yeah, as we were talking about the saints as the fruit of every genuine tradition or things like that.
But I mean, that's a data point. So it could be, the data could be different.
Yeah.
But just and I also like the data is not different.
Yeah, many times with some of these hyper sectarian claims are being made, like, okay, Swami, you're Gaudiya Vaishnava, but Jesus says in the Bible, I'm the way, the light, the truth, and nobody comes to the Father except for me. So there you have it. What to do with that? And I'm like, well, I can bring Bhagavad Gita and tell Christians, say, Sarva Dharmam Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam, which in one sense is even more shocking, because if you read it literally, it says, abandon all religions and just surrender to me. So I can take that and even make it 10 times more sectarian claim. And I'm sure a Muslim and a Jewish can bring their own sacred text and find verses that say the same. So instead of quarreling with one another to see which is the actual only one possible, realize, oh, probably we are all talking about the same thing from a particular time, place, circumstance, but we are talking about the same God, ideally, and hopefully we can understand that from a bigger picture. That's my hope when I engage.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I use the term interpretive tradition is so important. But like, we have acharyas in our tradition who really get to the essence of bhakti, and they keep us understanding it correctly. If we just go to the text ourselves, I think absolutely any religion in the world, you can have somebody understand it in a fanatical way. You could have Hindus going to war, doing all the extreme religious atrocities that have happened in the past.
The worst things in the history of humanity.
You can misunderstand any text in any way. What you need is the people there sincerely trying to understand it accurately. And if I'd like, so I entered that debate with the Muslim on which is more violent, but my view isn't that Islam is intrinsically a violent religion, and I hold that view for two reasons. One, I think it's fundamentally unproductive to convince people that an entire world religion is intrinsically violent, because not only that on both sides that inflames things and makes them worse, because people then treat Islam worse, treat Muslims worse, but also internally people hear that and think, yeah, my extreme understanding of Islam is true. Even these people who oppose Islam agree that I'm understanding Islam correctly. So it just makes things worse on both sides. But also, I don't think it's accurate, because I think, if we look at the Sufi traditions, we find a lot of what looks like real bhakti. And, that can happen within the Islam tradition. All it takes is someone to read the Islamic texts and extract a bhakti meaning out of it. And if that can be done, I want the moderate Muslims to win the debate, not the extreme Muslims. And if we argue that Islam is an extreme religion, then we're helping the extreme Muslims win the debate. Sorry, that kind of went off topic a little bit.
Yeah, no, but I appreciate the point, because again, as you say, we can justify anything and everything with any sacred text without proper lineage and guidance and maturity. We as Hindus, quote unquote, or Sanatan Dharmis or Gaudiya Vaishnava, can take Bhagavad Gita and create holy war and kill everyone because the Bhagavad Gita is spoken in a battlefield and who knows what. And again, if you have a proper reading, you understand we are talking about something else. And in the same way, I love reading Rumi and Hafiz or some other Sufi mystic Islam poets, and they're beautiful. And I'm about to engage in conversation with a Sufi practitioner that I've heard him, and his so loving, so peace invoking. And I mean, just hearing him, you can see that that's such a person living the essence of the spirit. So yeah, I think that in every single tradition you can find, again, as you say before, different adhikars, different levels of eligibility and understanding, and the worst and the best can happen in the name of religion. Yeah, for better or for worse. And just to wrap up, go into our particular tradition. We have talked about Hinduism, we have talked about different things that happen in Hinduism, more accurate terms, Astika, Sanatan Dharma. We have touched upon perennialism, other traditions. So our tradition is Gaudiya Vaishnavism, or Chaitanya Vaishnavism, as you have referred to as well. So in one sense, you mentioned in your article, if I'm not mistaken, it's not that Gaudiya Vaishnavism is a sect, quote unquote, of Hinduism, but it's a fully developed theological tradition, cosmology, metaphysics, soteriology, and so on, with its core unique point, sampradaya. Again, not want to make an exclusivistic claim, but just I think it's important, as you mentioned, in the wider context of, okay, we have Sanatan Dharma, different expressions of this ultimate truth. There's nuance there. For me, there's lots of importance in diversity. For me, it's of course importance of first laying a proper non-dual foundation and bedrock of unity, and how that expresses in different ways. So the different ways are the diversity that exists on the foundation of the undivided wholeness that reality is ultimate about. So in that diversity, Gaudiya Vaishnavism is very nuanced, very specific, very unique. So I think we have a case to also make in terms of, okay, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, as Prabhupada will say, Bhagavad Gita as it is. Okay, Gaudiya Vaishnavism as it is. No, in all its specificity, because even we may say, okay, I'm a Vaishnav, there are different schools of Vaishnavism which are not Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Not to downplay them, just to be specific when we need to be specific. Or we can say, I practice a bhakti. I belong to the bhakti tradition, but there are not only one bhakti tradition, right? As you were saying, we can appreciate bhakti in the Sufi tradition, in Christianity, what to speak in, I don't know, another bhakti tradition that use the term bhakti, like Ramanujacharya, Nimbarkacharya. Okay, I'm follow Vedanta. Which type of Vedanta? So again, sometimes as much as we beg for a universal recognition of the ultimate truth, Sanatan Dharma, there is so much specificity that also needs to be acknowledged. So we don't remain abstract or generic when referring to our tradition, for example. So, and even inside the Gaudiya Vaishnavism, there are so many branches and modes and ways of conceiving things and differences of opinion. So there's a whole sea of diversity that I do not see as something bad, but again, needs to be approached with the proper understanding of the common foundation, and then a new layer of diversity can be understood, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, nice. That's kind of a description of one of the points I made when you asked about debating. That like that's also, we can describe it with the word personalism, taking each tradition individually, and taking each member of that tradition individually too, treating them like a person and letting them represent their own understanding of the views. So when it comes to approaching different world religions or different I don't want to use the word sect, but different traditions, or with that crop up within that with different views, and just approaching them all individually, because we, rather than just giving generic arguments against Christianity, we can give arguments against one particular philosophical view that many Christians hold, and then there'll be other Christians who agree with our objection or object to that view for different reasons and hold a different view. And when we tackle it like that, then we can actually have productive conversations and all learn and come closer to God together.
Thank you. So just to conclude, I'm reflecting on, again, the main thread for our conversation was about Hinduism and how to maybe contemplate another more accurate ways of referring to what's going on, not only in India, because we are not in India, you're in New Zealand, I'm in North Carolina, and Hinduism or whatever happens under that name is not an Indian product, so to say. We're talking about something universal, but at the same time, there's specificity to each expression of the universal truth, and and learning how to name that, even it's a word, even it's a name, naming things play a role in preserving the authenticity for me of a tradition, and for me make, how to say, meaning making. Also, we need to learn to use proper words to make sense of what we are talking about. Like someone may say, you are doing all this podcast, just a name, you keep saying Hinduism, don't get too complicated. But actually words define our very identity, our very role and function as individuals, as a collective. So in the same way, you don't call your mom dad, right? Mom is mom and dad is dad, and each one has their own identity and role and function. Or you don't call Christianity Buddhism. In the same way, we won't refer, I think that's the case we are trying to make here. Let's not merely refer to Gaudiya Vaishnavism or any other tradition by just Hinduism, even if at some point we may need to introduce the conversation from those very broader terms. Hopefully we can progress the dialogue to get more and more specific and nuanced, so we know what we are talking about.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, the core point I was driving home in that article was what matters here. Like, I think I termed the article, I titled it "Why Hare Krishnas Don't Like the Term Hinduism," and I think I finally put my finger on it. Was we at times, depending on the context, but often we feel like that term brings more an inaccurate understanding. So why it matters is because, you know, wherever possible, we should refine language to increase clarity, precision, and understanding.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Arjuna. And before we conclude, I don't know if, as we close, is there any final reflection or comment and idea you would like to leave our listeners with, especially those listeners who may still use the word Hinduism casually or uncritically?
I mean, I don't. People can use the word how they like. You know, depending on the context, you'll use it at a different time. Everyone's got to make their own judgment in each context of whether they want to problematize the word or just wear the term or not. It really depends who you're talking to in the context. So that's for the listener to decide for themselves. But yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been fun, and thanks for all the podcasts and stuff you put out.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for your service with Theology Unleashed and everything else you are trying to do for the community. Pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks.